Hello and welcome back to the Foucault Forum for yet another episode. We're building steam towards what is, I'm hoping by the end of the academic year, a good inventory of guests and interviews, and it's certainly shaping up to be exactly that. So far on the channel, for those of you that have been following us, or maybe now you're just finding us and you're wondering, well, what else have we been talking about? Well, over the last few weeks, we've had 4 or 5 different episodes. No kind of one episode the same, or on topics that have been similar. I've spoken to activists, political activists from Northern Ireland. I've spoken to University of Chester students who have been transitioning from undergraduate to postgraduate degree and the experience of that transition. I've been speaking to Maddie Brown, who is a marketing coordinator from the University of Chester, and her views on the value of higher education still today. And I've also been speaking to the University of Chester Students' Union president. And that brings us to today. And I'm going to now introduce, well, I'm not going to introduce today's guest. Today's guest is going to introduce themselves because I don't feel confident in being able to adequately. That's my problem, it's just that I don't feel like I'll do you justice. I don't feel like I'll do anybody justice because we've been having some fantastic guests. And I feel like I'll miss something really pivotal out. So I pass the burden of introductions over to the guests themselves. So today's not going to be any different. And over to yourself.
Okay. Thanks, Paul. My name is Dr. Jolel Miah, and it's an interesting question about introducing us in ourselves. What do I say? Because it's a lot of things I do in my role, but for the audience, I'm a health psychologist, so I practice psychology, I suppose, in the space of health, and that's the idea, to improve health outcomes by looking at health attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, like why are we doing it and what we're not doing to improve our health. So professionally, I do health psychologist as my role. Also, I'm a academic. I teach psychology, social sciences. I'm a senior lecturer in social sciences at the University of Westminster. And I'm a board member for the British Psychological Society, and I'm a board member for equality, diversity, inclusion. And that means getting involved, looking at more how do you make psychology more inclusive, more equitable, and appreciate diversity, that actually human thinking, human behavior comes from different places and different understanding that as well. So I also host a podcast interviewing interesting guests about what I'm doing. So I know himself has been a guest. So I'm a host for Psychology Cast. In charity work, I do post mental health, sort of like psychoeducation for the public around how people can better access help, but also understand mental health from a faith and spiritual and cultural perspective, and how it's recognized in different symptoms in different faith communities. And that means what we do, we put on certain, communication, whether it's through events, workshops, or campaigns, about the importance of looking after mental health well-being, and not to leave it too late, because it can get worse, and how to access health early on. So early intervention and health, and working experience, worked in a range of settings, from public health statutory organisations, whether it's in commissioning or looking at health strategy for the population, and working in corporate as well, corporate sectors. It's very interesting working in health spaces there. Very briefly, really, really useful insight. And then other things I get up, or I should say professionally anyway, is hopefully by collaborating with others in other familiar spaces, if they need any sort of assistance with certain things or a perspective on things. So collaboration is a big part of what I do. So yeah, can you see that's a very, I mean, is that an introduction, Paul? I don't know.
That's an introduction, and you see, there's so many things there I would have missed out. That's why I think I'm doing right by passing the mantle over to the guests themselves, because mine would have been very, very brief. Because we were speaking before this, and I just jotted down a few points. But no, I think the elaboration by yourself, because it covers you know you best, and considering how I want to know your story, your journey, it's better for you to give that overview, and then we start then to maybe pick parts then to jump into. And I mean, I think for the audience that we have at the minute is of course very much orientated towards undergraduate students, and we both, I fear, need to cast our minds back. Certainly, I do, some time ago, to remember what it was like being an undergraduate student, and trying to reimagine, remember just what it was like to be in that position of just trying to navigate your way through your studies. Sometimes just trying to navigate your way from one end of the week to the next. Never mind trying to figure out what you were going to do post undergraduate degree, or what to do within the undergraduate degree to move your way forward. And I suppose that's where I'll bring us back to, however, and your journey from undergraduate to postgraduate, research, and then into the or probably at the same time, I would imagine, into the professional workplace as well. And yeah, just your initial kind of, what was the motivation, I suppose, particularly for health psychology back when you were at undergraduate level, or maybe what encouraged you to even take that route before then? So we'll maybe go back a little bit before to UCAS. What was the motivation, I suppose? What was the great thoughts, or the thought process? Where was it when you were at that stage of your career?
Yeah, no, thank you, Paul. I think it's hard to say. Well, it's hard to pinpoint the actual moment, because I think when I started off health, being a health psychologist, or even looking at health psychology undergrad days, I think it was not something I even looked into at all. Like, actually, in my final year, we were given an option module, whether you wanted to do a range of, modules that you want to do. And so I went along to a taster session. I remember, like, in the first couple of weeks. And then I actually didn't choose it. I chose something else. I actually chose psychology of performance, like inclusive art, music, and stuff like that. So actually, health psychology wasn't something that was interested in initially as a discipline. I think because I didn't know what it was, because other disciplines were more familiar, so like counseling, discipline. So I thought in my head, I thought health psychology is not really psychology, because it's more to do with the body and not with the mind. That's how I saw it. Obviously, wrong, or misinformed, I should say. So it wasn't essentially, I came to psychology in undergrad to learn about psychology in undergrad, how to help people, particularly how to help my family. My family had a lot of, and still do, a lot of mental health problems. And so counseling, I thought counseling was the answer. Like, to say all they need is a bit of someone to listen to them and to feel that, therapeutic effect, and then things would be okay. So I studied psychology to understand some of can this really explain it? How do we go about helping them? Then I got exposed to other forms of psychology while I was doing the undergrad, developmental, social psychology differences, and as well as biopsychology. And you realize, this is starting to tell a bigger story. It's not just about, just getting the help. You need to understand the wider context. So I didn't come into health psychology, as an undergrad sort of goal. It only came after my master's, but after actually undergrad, I did some, I did some support work, like, for a charity, and it's for HIV charity, and it's about 3.5 days a week. I was going in, and we had to put on these workshops around how to tackle stigma around HIV, and I had to go and talk to people like about stigma and create leaflets or create information points. And so then after that, it got me thinking around maybe we could do something about like, what's going on here? Why are people still not getting access and help with HIV? Like, if it's affecting your body and your health, but there's this thing around attitude and belief. People are not going to come forward, disclose in fear of discrimination. I thought, okay, well, how do we tackle that? But more importantly, I thought, what part of psychology does that belong to?
Right.
Like, how can I use my degree to understand all this stuff? Like, I spent a lot of money in my education at that point. And that's when I started to realize, okay, this might be, I need to go and speak to some people. I spoke to some people at the uni, locally. I said, like, and I was going to choose initially psychological, a master's in healthcare management. But it was only I spoke to someone else at the uni. They said, have you thought about doing this other course, which is probably more aligned to what you see about psychology? And it was an MSc in health psychology. And that's when I enrolled, and I realized, okay. So it was a combination of being exposed, going on that journey, and trying something, asking more questions, also talking to other people, experts in the field, before finally make that decision about I'm going to choose health psychology or this area, rather than clinical for other thoughts. And as about 11 or 12 different disciplines, I chose this one. Because I really thought, how do you stop it? So it's not the recovery anymore. But how do you stop people getting through in the first place? So prevention was a big part. And that's where I started to feel a bit more excited or happy or curious or just a bit more like, this is something we can work with. Sounds hopeful.
Yeah, you see something, don't you? Like, I don't know, it can be hard to maybe sort of describe what that is, but I always describe kind of my epiphany moments between I'd said for a long time, I suppose that never really ruled out, like, doing a PhD, for example, but I'd never really taken the notion seriously either, mainly because of, I think, maybe imposter syndrome. I thought, well, I'm never going to be PhD level, like. And then there was the ignorance behind it then as well. From my perspective, it's just how you're, what, how much work is it? How would you even do it? How would you get into it? All this. And there was just that epiphany moment, though, that whenever I was just in the middle of my master's degree and I was writing a paper on, I think it was actually, because I swapped over to do, from psychology, criminology as an undergraduate. I wanted to orientate myself more to criminology, but I wanted to go and learn more about law. And there was this master's degree at John Moores, and I just ended up going for global crime, justice, security, which was quite legal heavy, but it was an international perspective as well, and it was just fascinating. And I was writing this one paper on nuclear restrictions, really, on the international stage, and how there is very much, or how there's a great lack of nuclear restrictions, really, on the international stage. There's plenty on, biological warfare and weapons and all that. Anyway, and I was just writing the paper on I can't remember the exact particulars of the topic, but it was on nuclear weaponry and the legislation around it and treaties and what have you. And I thought, nah, this is something I could do for a living. And you feel like there's a purpose. I think you feel like that there is an importance to it. And from there, just you snowball, I think, and I think that's what carries a lot of PhDs through their bloody PhD, because it is an experience of, well, it's trials and tribulations, and I think that's sort of that notion, that feeling is the great motivator, I think, for successful PhDs.
Yeah, I think it's that. I don't know, like, is it that thinking style that we have, or approach that we have? Is it innate? I always like to find out, like, what's driving us to ask those questions. And PhD people have that sort of mindset when they approach the question, which is what we kind of like encourage, isn't it, to think about what's in front of us critically, evaluate. I didn't know what that meant. I just thought it means,
Yeah.
you know, critically being judgment, or you criticize someone, that negative,
Yeah.
you destroy someone's character or you attack someone's character. Yeah, that's why I thought critic was. So I was
Was
quite
that such
hesitant.
a
Right, right. Yeah, I was quite hesitant to do that. Like when I was
yeah.
critiquing, I felt like, I don't want to, because I don't want to be that person. I'm not that person. Actually, critical thinking means different in the way we understand it. So that was a bit of a eye opener at uni. Like
Yeah.
critical thinking is good for us, not it's not a bad thing, you know.
Yeah. And it's the more you critique work,
Mm.
disciplines, and subjects and issues, that it only adds fuel to the intrigue, doesn't it? It adds fuel
Yeah,
to that motivation, I think, not just for PhD, but we now know post PhD, it's what carries you on for your career, your day to day, your week to week, isn't it? And I mean, again, that level of intrigue has taken you a few places, and you've noted a few of them already. And I think this is, I mean, you're a great guest to speak to for a number of reasons, but particularly for this channel when we're so focused on the social sciences, because I mean, psychologist, and you've got working experience as well in a number of different sectors. That one in particular is closer to my home as a criminologist as well, because you spend some time. I was going to say the key word here is as staff
yeah,
in the prison service, because without that, it's a completely different
yeah.
assumption being made, or a perception being built. Whereas if I were to say you spent some time in the prison service, but as staff, you've been in the prison service as well as some, the other places you mentioned, like corporate settings and what have you. But we'll hone in, maybe, if you don't mind, to your
Yeah.
experiences in the prison service, because that would have been something else. Because I've been in the prison once, and again, if I left that as it was, you might be led to the wrong assumption. But no, I've been in a prison once as a guest. Well, technically, I've been in twice. I was in as a visitor some 16, 17 years ago. We'll not go down that avenue, but I've been in another time as an actual guest, as a someone to come in and deliver a couple of classes. This was HMP Lancaster Farms. Sorry.
Mhm.
What year are we in now? 2025. Go back to 2023, if I remember correctly, and to go in and to deliver a couple of classes to prisoners, to inmates, on why there are myths and falsehoods around climate change
Mm.
that we believe,
Yeah.
and who is fueling those myths, and so on and so forth. And then I got to do a tour and speak to inmates, and, as they were in workshops and classes. Very educational sort of day for me. It was a learning experience, but it was also an educationally built day, because my classes were built into a course that they were doing just on climate change, and the classrooms that we were in were very much orientated towards them doing tasks and things like that. So that's my sort of very short overview of my experience being in the prison system. You likely have much more than that, though.
No, thanks, but I think your experience is still like really valuable when people are listening. Like, how can it be applied, and how basically these people are just people like you and I, like human beings have questions about the world, and just because they're in that place, it doesn't mean like that the thinking and the belief stops or anything like that. But yeah, I was there for some years. So altogether, I was to do a number on it, about 8 years, 7 to 8 years. I was doing clinics in there, not in the space of education, but in terms of healthcare. So, I was part of the NHS public health teams, and I'd go in and have clinics to speak to men and support them around behavior change, around getting them to stop using certain things. And I'm even careful what I say when I say, when I introduce it, like I've been in the prison service or worked in the prison service. So language is important, absolutely, because even I found myself reflecting on that when I was doing it. And the other point I would make is about working in such a space is um, I believe that people can get better. I think people can recover. I think there's other things going on. I don't think people are innately bad, and we shouldn't give up on people, because these people are members of society, even though they've committed a crime, or and therefore as something they shouldn't be doing. And so I'm careful about how I speak about around it, because obviously there might be listeners who might be victims of crime. So I don't want to like diminish what the purpose of doing sentencing or doing your time in prison. But yeah, I like to work. I work with men. There's a men's prison, and I would go in and see them and support them. And support them sometimes over a 12-week program, sometimes 6 months, sometimes a year. Sometimes people leave the program, come to the program, they restart, rejoin. So it was a very, because it's all part of the process. When they're trying to make change, you cannot expect people to say, right, you're going to come for 12 weeks and you're going to change your behavior. Now, sometimes people are a bit more longer in the timeline. Some people do it quickly. Some people do it within that 12 weeks. But normally we use science-based evidence to say this is the way we're going to deliver these clinics, because these are the best outcomes. But we worked in healthcare. So I worked in healthcare. There used to be a healthcare corridor, and I used to work with nurses, doctors, even dentists. Interesting. Tell you a bit about that. Dentist is quite important. And that's because a lot of people think, yeah, you get some people when there are sort of like fights or violence, yeah, there could be damage, of course, to the face and to the body overall. And your teeth might need a bit of attention. But one thing when I was curious, I started to ask, like, because I see some of my patients in the dentistry sort of rooms, as you're going past the corridor, and you're thinking that patient's on my list next. So, and then naturally you'd ask questions like, why is this person having this dental work? And sometimes I found it quite troubling or disturbing, to the point that some people were using a lot of chemicals and they were damaging their teeth, and it was affecting obviously the oral healthcare. So that was quite a bit of an interest when working in healthcare in prison. Like, you'll see other professions in there, especially dentistry. You have pharmacists in there, people giving the medication and stuff. But definitely working in such a space, so I got to see a lot of things, and a lot of people shared a lot of things, and I try to share it in a way that still keeps their privacy and confidential, while respecting that inmate, because I know some of them are still in there, because some of them are in for life, and some of them are still coming out on sentence. Some people are fresh into the sentence. But yeah, I saw a lot of both staff and inmate behavior. So, and equally, they're interesting. Like, it's not just the inmates; it's the staff as well.
I was going to say, because I touch upon like a bit of a similar point as well.
Mm-hmm.
At a certain point in a module that I teach to my third year students, it's on death penalty and international injustices. But in we kind of dedicate half the module to the death penalty, and there's one lecture at the very end of that first term. It's on life on death row, and I touch upon, because the main focus is still on the life of the offender in that particular prison environment.
Okay.
But I also bring focus onto victims' families and the offenders' families, and then to staff, because staff get overlooked quite a bit in these environments, I feel, in terms of their physical and mental well-being. It is very easy to do that, because prisons exist because of the offenders, don't they? And the staff get a wage and they get to go home, and everybody thinks, as long as they're kitted out and there's a few of them around, to support each other, they generally should get on okay. But it's just a tough environment. It takes a particular type of person, I think, to be able to work in the prison system. It's for a variety of reasons. Like I said, I feel like they often get overlooked. There's not a great deal spoken about the experiences of prison staff, apart from whenever you hear in the news, maybe sometimes, about prison staff getting attacked, and even then they have to get severely attacked before it even makes the news. But I can imagine it's a very common occurrence, and I mean, I couldn't do it. Just outright, I couldn't. I don't think work in a prison with staff. So you've got you got something about you that I didn't have or couldn't have, because it's just think that it's a brave profession to be. It's a brave environment to be in.
Yeah, I think no, I think no, thanks for pointing that out. I think yeah, lots of interest should be paid attention. Maybe probably like prison officers, who work closely with inmates, who interact with them on a basis. But I do say to people who might be listening, like I didn't go into after the undergrad or even the masters into that space. If I did, I think I would have walked away very quickly. So I think you need to build up the skills, if you like, of working with people in general,
Yeah.
And then so you can, when you go into such a space, you know how to go about your interactions, understand what to observe, how to construct the intervention, because it's all in the form of like to help them, not to harm them. And it's done on a collaborative process, which is good. But how do you do that if you haven't got the exposure before? I think that really helped me before working in, whether it's in the public, even working in retail, because you're dealing with members of the public. And I always say, like, if you members of the public, you get everything.
So awkward. Jesus Christ, I've been in retail myself. You can tell, and hospitality. I feel every bit of pain that you felt.
I want the population to work with, I think, to not to discount that experience, because they are everyday people, and in prison or in hospitals, they are everyday people. They are just humans who basically may have ended up in this space, but they're still a human being in the functional sense. You'll get some people are a bit more agitated than others, but that's again general public. I like that. That's just how it is. So I think it did help me going into those other spaces before coming into this space. I think, and then I had to make a decision about if you do. I think one thing I realized, even with the nurses and the doctors, and also prison officers and the wardens, it's that decision you have to make about your safety. You're putting yourself at risk, but you have to make that as a personal decision to say, I mean, there's enough, protections in place, of course. And then I made the decision of like, well, society has risks in itself when we cross the road and when we go into certain neighborhoods or at certain times, and maybe you want to avoid certain trains, for example. So I think conscience as humans, when we're working in a space professionally, we do that reflective practice anyway before making a decision to work in a secured environment like that. Which is interesting. Even police officers, like they make a decision when because they're going to come across anything, and they make that decision early on.
Yeah, and police officers arguably maybe more, so at least prisons to a greater extent are more controlled environments as well, so you can kind of know what to expect on a lot of days. Oh yeah, there's a great element of unpredictability as well in prisons, but certainly much less so when you're a police officer out in the open as well. You made a point there earlier as well about that, a belief in the ability for, I suppose, rehabilitation. And that leans into, I mean, criminologically speaking, a lot of theoretical discussion on desistance from crime, and what can be meaningful sort of things to pick up on when it comes to offenders, in what would particularly repeat offenders, because it's all well and good, somebody doing a once-off crime, whether it be sort of low-end, serious, whatever it is. But for most people, and I'm sure you might agree as well, most people are, who are offenders, they're kind of one-time offenders. Repeat criminality belongs to a smaller percentage than the actual crime statistics would have you believe, nearly. And I'm sure your time in prisons, you've probably seen recurrent faces, maybe a bit of a revolving door at times of people coming in. It's just, there's John back again. What have you done this time, type of thing. But I mean, in desistance theories and criminology, they lean into meaningful research that meaningfully finds that there's correlations between the creation of positive social bonds, for example, people getting better, more positive relationships, in some cases repairing relationships with maybe family members and what have you, having better education, and that having a knock-on effect then of hopefully being able to get better jobs and then adequate housing and things like that. Basically, reasons for social value, for lack of a better description, reasons for repeat offenders not to reoffend. Give them stuff to lose if they were to offend and end up in prison again. And I think the point I'm getting at is the question I'm leading to is in line with sort of offender welfare and maybe buying into offender rehabilitation. What do you think, from your experience, would be some of the more important things to hone into?
I think, yeah, I'd say a lot of them, like the ones I used to see, when I walked in, first thing I saw, they were quite, it didn't have much nutrition about them. They seemed very, like, not well nourished. So I think what's going on there? Like, why they're not eating? I suppose, and I suppose it's about paranoia and trust. And I suppose the appetite goes off, right? When you see certain things. So I do wonder, like, about those people, like how much they're being exposed to is destroying them, so they can't recover, because what they are being exposed to in that way, that they can't get, to show remorse for their crimes, or to reconcile with their thoughts, because they've been constantly exposed to stress. So although a state might say, well, it's punishment, we're going to punish these people, otherwise it's not fair on the victim. So this is why it's interesting about this question. I mean, what I would say is, most if you give them, if you give them 5 million quid each, there's a good chance none of them will ever come back. That's rehabilitation gone. So a lot of it's sometimes down to poverty, and if they don't have that, then of course they're going to get bored, and they're going to think like, well, what's the purpose of me? If there's no investment into like their spaces, like communities and mental health space, then they're going to keep on coming back, because the issues of the sources of issues, you go back to the original, what's causing all this, the underlying issues, it's more social than psychological. Although the social has an impact on psychological, which allows, I mean, there was a guy in there, he was excited every day, every time he see me, like, and he had, I think, had ADHD, and he said to me something interesting in the session, and again, I'm being confidentially, of course, so I'm not revealing who this chap is. But he used to say something quite interesting. So I need to stop breaking into people's house, but I need to start selling things on eBay. But I need to go to charity shops and pay for them first, and then put them on eBay to make money. But I need to stop breaking into people's house to do that. I need to do it properly. So he was going on. So he was telling me all these things, like, really excited about his journey. It's almost that I asked him, like, has no one, did anyone not share that with you before? And you could tell he went really sad. He went really sad, and I knew, okay, he's had this conversation with someone else, and it probably hasn't worked out. But the point is, he was excited to change his behavior. He was the one saying, I'm going to this session, I'm going to this workshop, really trying. And it kind of reinforced my belief, like, yeah, there's an example of someone who's trying to reconcile and to progress, rather than destroy himself. There are people in there I saw who are destroying themselves, like through substances, and get into more trouble. And it's almost like they're not comfortable in their body, who they are, and they don't want to confront. Because I was interested in, like, these people are using certain substances to help them cope, and I'm trying to get them to change their behavior, or motivate them, I should say. And so you see some examples, like, I've just given you two there, and there are others, of course, but I do think that humans, we're not innately, it goes back to something innately, like, there's something causing this person to be this way, whether it's a health problem in my my profession, or whether it's something else. Like, no, there's a cause and effect here. We need to understand the cause. But one thing I will say around working in that space, not everyone will have sympathy for these people, or empathy, to point out, because they're like, why are we spending money on these people? They've done crime, we should not give them anything. Like, we should We should lock the door and throw the key away. That obviously, because they're going to come back after 5-6 years. They're out in society.
Yeah.
So it's not really sustainable thinking.
No.
I do think that, it's a collective sort of like who's responsible here, and it's everyone, including society. I don't think society in itself, public, should just wash their hands like, no, they're part of you. Yeah, you don't know who in your network would commit a crime one day. Do we write people off? So I do believe in hope and recovery in that way. I think it's more sustainable because they're going to come back into society at one point, and they do have family members, and they used to do family visits, and they used to say, I'm looking forward to my children coming to visit me. It has an impact on their children, and they're part of society, and it's not their fault that their parent is in that space. So we do have a collective, that's why my collective responsibility.
Yeah, and I think that goes back as well to just some points I was making about that sort of internalization of, I mean, it's one thing punishing, and of course, to an extent, the criminal justice system is set up to punish, to bring about some level of retribution, justice, if that's, if the more vengeful arm of the criminal justice system is your cup of tea, then yeah, it is set up and to deliver some of that, and the blocks. The removal of liberty is when we talk about the prison system, is the first most obvious part of that. But we need to be, I think we just don't do enough, and it comes back to some of the points you made as well. We don't do enough to take rehabilitation. If we're serious about being rehabilitative in the criminal justice system, we need to spend more money. More needs to be done. Prison, the removal of one from society and segregating them in a prison institution in and of itself without doing anything else. If you literally just put someone in a prison for 5 years, there's you've committed this crime, sit inside the cell now for 5 years, and you left them to it, you just fed them 2 or 3 meals a day, and then you let them out after 5 years, the rehabilitation of that person is probably going to be nil. But it's going to be quite harmful to them and others around them. And we need to recognize as a society, as a British society, that it is a minute number of offenders who are incarcerated who will genuinely never be released. It is a minute number. The vast majority at some stage are expected to rejoin society. So the big question has to be is, what version of that person do we want to see released? Because we have, of course, rightfully, legislation, laws, rights that does not just allow that doesn't allow us to just throw away the key, lock them up and throw away the key. There has to be considerations of necessity and proportionality when it comes to sentencing, so that we don't just lob people in cells indefinitely for minor, medium severity crimes. We've been there, we've done that, we've been in worse positions with the criminal justice system historically. So now we have much more and better considerations of necessity and proportionality. And alongside that then has to be better, more serious considerations of rehabilitation. Otherwise, a lot of them, and you know this, will just cycle, they'll circle around between release, prison, release, prison. Yeah. And it costs the taxpayer money. I know that if a politician were to stand up and say in a manifesto, for manifesto pledges, seeking to seriously be elected, and they said, "Hey, look, we're incarcerating far, far too many people here." Yeah. Our prison system quite literally was ready to break at the seams whenever Labour took it over last year. That's an indicator that we're overusing it anyway. But if a politician stood up, or a party stood up and said, "Hey, look, we need to incarcerate less people. Less people need to go. Less offenders need to go to prison. In fact, what we should do instead is put money into serious money into rehabilitation and trying to work alongside offenders, repeat offenders, to not re-offend." Jesus Christ, the Daily Mail will tear that person apart, tear that party apart. It hasn't got, unfortunately, a political cell, and because it hasn't got a political cell, it brings back then to the point you've made that it's just, the money just isn't there, because that's not what the public want to see. They want it partly our fault. It is our responsibility, because we are blindsided by vengeance and political and media rhetoric that is along those lines, and that's what we vote for. Since the 70s, 80s, whenever the Conservatives really cranked up, we're the party of law and order. Tony Blair's New Labour stormed to historical election success in 1997 with the mantra "tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime," and every political party ever since that has been successful has rested upon similar sentiment. Not a lot said about successful rehabilitation, and with yourself mentioning things as well, like what does things like diet and a healthy diet, how does that play a part? And people will scoff at that. They'll think, oh, so we're just gonna feed them a few cucumbers then and hope that they don't go out and break people's heart. You know what I mean? But people will, and that's the way that the right wing media, Daily Mail, the Daily Express, Telegraph, that's the way that they would spin it. Though they would trivialize something like that. But ultimately, research shows money invested into rehabilitation will save the taxpayer money, because these people are more likely, it's not a cure, there is no such thing, but it is more likely to bring about successful rehabilitation and long-term desistance from crime. But it's not a sell for whatever reason.
And I'd add that the class of prisoners, the economic class, they seem quite similar. Like, they don't have much money. And some of the inmates would say, like, oh, if we had the money, and the mental capacity, he goes, the real criminals will be inside, we'll be outside. And I thought that was quite powerful. Like, the fact that he made that,
that is powerful, right? And sorry, I got it. Just before I forget, because I got a similar sentiment as well. I've told you before that I'm researching for it's actually for your channel, wasn't it? I'm researching a book on my hometown for Strabane during the Troubles, and I've been interviewing, and still have yet to carry out quite a few, but very quickly, I've been interviewing, ex IRA volunteers. And I've been asking all of them closer to the end of my interviews with them, how they would feel about a truth commission being implemented in Northern Ireland. So it was one of these things that was a conservative implementation, or at least an efforts to implement in recent years, in the last years of their sort of 14 years in government. And it was one of them very rare unifying things in Northern Ireland that all parties, all sides kind of came together to say, nah, we don't want that. But in asking these interviewees that question, how would you feel about, or how did you feel about the British government trying to implement that, a lot of them came back and said something similar in essence to what you just said. I mean, if they did, it's probably going to make the British government look worse than us. And I mean, it rings true, like in a number of ways. And this sort of it feeds into larger discussions then about hegemonic narrative, dominant narratives, and who holds the microphone and who's speaking loudest and who gets to direct the flow of sort of cognitive, social cognitive traffic, shall we say, and the views and the framing of certain issues and certain groups. And when it comes to bringing us back to that powerful expression, it's true. Like, a lot of people who create greater harms in society never see a day behind a prison cell, and yet the cultivation of a lot of the crimes that are symptoms of those greater harms, and the criminals that are perpetrators of the crimes that are symptomatic, are the ones that populate prison cells. The more petty crimes, they might be repeat offenders, granted, but they are the petty neck. They're the lower ended form of criminality. I mean, the vast majority of prison inmates are barely at that kind of level where prison is a necessity for them. They need to be, more often than not, a genuine sort of physical threat to society, and a lot of them kind of barely meet that threshold.
Yeah, I think that's where we see them in that way. We have compassion for them. We know, actually, you just need a bit more resource and a bit of support. You wouldn't be doing that in the first place. Of course, there's a bit of, as you say, a bit of the percent of the population that will be committed to committing crimes, but majority, yeah, like sometimes they're in there just for a bad moment. And how do we then look at that person in society and that's not to wash away, of course, as we know, I'm sure you agree, Paul, like to we're not diminishing their crimes or impact on the
Oh
victim,
yeah.
of course, right?
And again, that's where it gets trivialized a lot of the time as
Yes.
well, because you start
Exposure.
talking about things like this
Yeah.
more openly and trying to be productive about it, and then people throw their arms up like, ah, so we'll just let them away with it then, will we? It's like, that is not what we're saying. That is not at all
No.
even close to what we're saying.
And that is a
But yeah.
distraction. I think like that is to take away from the bigger point. So they're
Mm,
holding on this point to say, like the what they call sensationalism of it, they're trying to
yeah.
make it look like this is so outrageous, but it takes the attention away from the bigger issues. So what happens? Like, yeah, the person falls into that trap, and then it's a cycle that repeats. And then we ask ourselves as professionals in the space, whether it's psychologists, criminologists, or people working in legal, what do we want? Like, what do we want as the outcome? We want a functioning society. We want a functioning system that actually repairs and restores and reconciles, rather than repeat repeat offenses, repeat,
Yeah.
and there's no. So we're interested in successful methodologies, if like successful interventions, and it's our job to ask those questions. I think like we're here to, because if we don't ask questions, who will?
Exactly that. And I mean, I love that sort of focus in there on the prison system from a criminologist's perspective. Of course, it's got that level of intrigue. But I think we'll maybe move from that, and for the last segment maybe of this episode, I'd like to know more about, because well, this is something that again we sort of bring ourselves back to the difficulty of undergraduate students, I think, being able to, well, see into the future, and see what their careers might well be like, 10, 15, 20 years down the line. And a lot of them as well, not there's a growing number, I feel, of students who come and know maybe from first or second year of their degree. Still more so at the last year, maybe for thereafter, but certainly I think there's a growing number from earlier in their undergraduate degree who know that they want to go on and do postgraduate and maybe even a PhD, albeit they're still the minority by some distance. Most students, whenever they enter, I'm sure you might have found this yourself, are just thinking about getting through the degree and they had a job afterwards. But sometimes students then realize that actually I can induce real change via research, via further higher education, postgraduate, PhD. Don't even necessarily need the PhD in a lot of cases to do research, but certainly it does sort of entrench you into research a hell of a lot more. And thereafter, then you get to hopefully incite those real meaningful changes via the research that you carry out. And that sort of brings me then to, where are you now in your research journey, shall we say, with health psychology? Because the prison sort of side of your career is behind you now, I suppose, at least for the time being. I don't know if you've got any motivation to re-enter the prison system again, but you're with the University of Westminster now, and you have been for a few years at least. And yeah, if you want to tell us about the work that you're doing there and the research and what you're trying to, or what you're hoping to find within your field.
Yeah, no, thank you, Paul. The first point I'd make is around so just to make that point of the prison, it's more in a collaborative research projects I'm involved with. So people ask me to work with them when they're doing more research into inmates. So and they ask me to collaborate on a project. So that's quite interesting. Still be part of it through the research sense, but as a collaborator rather than as a lead. But in my sort of research interest area around leading, I'm very interested in why people don't get help or access healthcare, like what's going on psychologically, particularly for faith communities. Is it the actual infrastructure that's not fun and doesn't understand its population about its needs, or is it the actual population doesn't understand healthcare and how it works? So I try to address both, and I work with different people and different disciplines: public health, nutrition, healthcare access, all these other places that inform, and I'm the psychologist, if you like, in that space. But I'm very interested. So I get my students, for example, to look at how does well-being look like in healthcare for these people, because it's not the same. So it's trying to make sure we're not using that one size fit model, because health conditions can get worse if we end up taking the wrong advice. So trying to understand it both from a healthcare provider, sort of like, why haven't your patients recovered, etc. Why are they struggling with this? What should we do about it? So very solution focused. Like, yeah, the problems are the problems. So what are we going to do about it? And then the understanding the population perspective, like how do they even understand their own health? I mean, we do certain things like brushing our teeth, and when we have a bit of a cold, we have a bit of a Lemsip, or we do something, right? Intervene. But I'm interested in how to prevent. Like my PhD, for example, was around what motivates us to walk and cycle, to move.
Mm.
What is it? Social? Is it psychological? Is it? And that's what I was looking at in my PhD.
Mm.
And I learned that actually it's a combination of all sorts of stuff. Even though simple behavior like walking, moving the blood, the blood around the body and the oxygen around the body, that's not why people do it. People don't wake up in the morning, I'm going to move the body around, I'm going to move the blood around today. It's more meaningful than that. And I think my research comes off the back of that. Although it's physical activity, it's understanding how people, what they do for their health. Like, you've got, like, even in healthcare, when I used to have appointments, some people never used to turn up. So we used to have what we call a DNA rate, which did not attend, and we have a target for DNA rates. And I thought, this is your health. Why would you not come? Like, what's going on? Like, this isn't a shopping or like a football game, or this is you, this is your life. If you don't do something, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. Like, and it only affects you. Okay, it might affect your family, but this is your body. Surely, if someone's not looking after, like, what's going on there? And that's where I really sort of place my emphasis right now on health research, health inequalities, health access, patient-doctor communication. And that could be in a variety of settings. It could be prison healthcare, it could be in hospitals, it could be charities, because the principles are fundamentally the same. Like, if the doctor's giving you medical advice, why are you not adhering to it? And I want to know why. What's going on to help you, to help that person.
And that's again, I think where it's a position of further research, and that I think undergraduates don't necessarily either know about, that that they I don't think they can see maybe themselves getting into a position where it's all right. It's all well and good going into, say, for criminology students going into the prison service, or counselling students going into, like maybe the NHS to work as a counsellor and things like that.
Yeah.
But you could actually inform the way that those institutions, those sectors work via the research that you do, via the findings that you do. So for, I suppose, to bring us...
One thing, Paul, because they don't know the answers, and they're looking for the answers. And that's where the research for these people can find these sort of, like, I call them formulas. Like, there's formulas in the world. We need to discover them, understand them, then we can share them and say, look, that's the formula that you need to help your service, like here. And that's why research is so important. Anyone listening, absolutely. You're right, Paul. Yeah.
And I think it's just about giving that vision to people as well. Hopefully anybody watching this as well, particularly an undergraduate, postgraduate as well, no matter what point you're at, you can get into a point where you are able to inform and change on a sort of wholesale institutional level. Because I tell my undergraduates quite often, we hope to be writing references for you guys as you're getting into, maybe you're going into like a government job for and trying to influence government policy, and so many different arenas. But universities are forefronts. They are leaders in the research that they produce, and how any well-meaning governments should then take the findings that we produce. I mean, we put the labour in, we put the legwork in, we hand that research over, we put it into the public domain, and it should be taken on board. And I'm just thinking about maybe COVID and that tussle between government and public health authorities that was quite open at that time, a very business orientated government. We wanted to keep, well, the economy going and the economy flowing. And then you had public health officials as well that was trying to advise a very different route out of a public pandemic. That might be something maybe we could discuss at a later time. But just to sort of draw us now to the final points for this episode, and thanks once more for joining us. For any students or for anybody watching who might well be interested in a career, in a profession where they are influential on social change and policy, and maybe looking to become more active in research or just activism in general, what maybe advice would you give to somebody looking to work in a field that is kind of bridging psychology and health and other social and maybe political dynamics as well? So what's within the sciences, anybody who is looking to get into this position of influence and change on a more meaningful wholesale level, like how we hope to through the research that we do, what would your piece of advice be to them to either, I suppose, get into that position, like I hope that we're into, or advice for when they are there? Because it isn't an easy gig that we're in. It's a very competitive and at times very loud area is academics and research. So what would your advice be for anybody aspiring to get into the positions that we're in now, albeit different fields, but looking to make a change?
Yeah, I think this is a very important question, isn't it? Especially the market and the way employment is going, the investment. I suppose that the main thing I would say, like the foundational element to it is about understanding what your values are. Really, and that might seems quite simplistic. Like, but I think going on that journey initially, that reflective journey, understand what your value will help you decide, okay, where do I put my efforts in? The second thing is I point out is as human beings, I think everybody has value. Everybody is looking for the answers, I believe, to make a better life for themselves and for others. So understand what your value is. What do you bring to the table? Whether it's conscientiousness, whether it's empathy, whether it's critical thinking, really try to identify what are your key sort of values. That's super important. And then what would you really bring to the table? Think about the wider society's problems. Well, how are you going to solve it? Because that's what people are looking for, employers are looking for. I've got this issue. I want to do this thing. What are you going to do about it? And really trying to understand, how will I answer that question? How could I play a part? Because everyone will. And how could they not just even contribute, but how could they innovate? This isn't just about participating. This is about also innovating and creating things, because they might come up with solutions that they've seen things that they could just do it and try it. Like, we do our sort of work around podcasting and blogs and all that stuff. That's innovation through charities. So don't think in the conventional sense that the solution's already there. What would you bring? How would you solve it? Really think on those foundational elements before you start thinking too much about professionally, really thinking about your values, how you would solve these issues, what are the biggest issues, where your principles are with certain things, where would you put your energy in? I think really understanding yourself and then experimenting, trying to do different jobs, different roles as I've done. It's all part of it, getting experience. How would you understand experience if you haven't done all these things? And do not discount retail. Of course, we've said retail before. Any job brings value.
Oh, you'll learn a good day's graft in those areas.
Yeah. I think if not more, right? Because you get everybody. So I think even volunteering experience, you must understand about yourself. But how do you do that? You have to put yourself through these obstacles and, these courses, if you like. to really get and understand, this is what I want to do. But that's what I would say for now, without giving overwhelming them.
No, that's great. Thank you very much for your time on this episode. I have absolutely no doubt that you're going to feature again at some point in the not so distant future. But for today, thank you very, very much for your input, Joel.
Thank you so much, Paul, for inviting me. And yes, I look forward to coming back.
And we look forward to having you as well. And that brings us to the end of another episode on the Foucault Forum. For anybody who has just found us, absolutely hit that like, follow, subscribe, whatever button it is from whatever platform it is that you're watching these videos on. For more content, as this channel grows, we're going to be getting on a wealth of other very interesting guests. And as I've just mentioned, at some point down the ways, we're going to be getting people back on again for updates in terms of what they're doing, their contributions to what's going on out there in the world. And is very relevant and important for us to know that bit more about. But until next time, good luck, look after yourself. Do try, like I said, to hit that follow button and find us for or get the reminders in for our next episode. And until next time, see you later.